And we are live, I believe. Clint Russell, Liberty Lockdown, thank you so much for tuning back in. We have a very special guest, and with the news that's been breaking lately, I'm not even sure if Scott's privy, but latest reports are that Joe Biden intends to step down, and he will not be endorsing Kamala Harris. So they're going to have an open process to decide his replacement at the DNC. Bedlam is about to break out, ladies and gentlemen. But the man of the hour, Libertarian Institute, Scott Horton. What's up, brother?
Hey, how you doing? Hey, what's the source on that? Is that in the Times?
No, it's not the Times. It's rumor mill stuff. It's OAN at this point. So let's cool our jets here. But
well, they do have a story like that. I was just reading something like that in NBC, which is saying that people very close to him were saying it's nearing the end.
Yeah,
I'm not so sure if these stories aren't part of the pressure.
Well, that's true.
It's
true. Yeah, and he also came down with the coof a couple days ago, and it was right after he had told BET that he would step down if there was a health ailment.
Yeah.
But my guess,
that's going to come and go. That's only a coincidence. They're not going to use COVID as the reason.
No, I agree. But I'm just saying, like, it gives him an out if he wants to take it, and I think that. Like, the guy's such a massive egotist. Like, he's ran for president 1,000 times. He very much doesn't want to get out of power, particularly with his son and his own criminality. I'm sure he would like to stay in there just to keep him and his family safe. Do you think that's the primary driving factor, or do you think it's just like, I have the ring of power, I can't relinquish it?
Oh, it's ego more than anything. I mean, we're talking about Joe Biden here, dude, and he's been, wanted to be president since he was a young boy, and has been, first got elected to the Senate in 1972, took office in 73.
That's crazy.
And has always been among the most arrogant power mongers in Washington, all of these years. The only time he wasn't in power was during the Trump years, because of course he was vice president for 8 years during Barack Obama.
Right.
And, boy, I tell you, I mean, he is the leader of the party. He is already the nominee because the party helped him lie that he's just fine. And so they precluded having any real primary season. I know a couple of states held primaries anyway, but not to any real effect. And essentially they were just going to try to get by on the lie. Remember in the State of the Union, I think he was pretty doped up because he started off like really loud and crazy, which they took as strong, I guess, in the media. Yeah. And, in the debates, even going back to 2020, there had been so much hype about how demented he was back then. And then he did okay in the debates and lived, did better than expectations in the debates. So then the idea was like, he kind of tricked the Republicans into leaning too hard into this dementia thing when actually he's really not as bad as they thought he was.
And then 2024 rolls around, and all of a sudden he's as bad as we all thought he was.
Yeah, he's really bad.
Yeah,
and
I saw a clip from the 2020 debates to the 24, and it's stunning. I mean, like he sounds like a fully functioning human being comparatively. He still wasn't really great, obviously. Yeah. I don't think he's ever been a great speaker, but if you see him in the 80s, he's pretty sharp, honestly.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of
I mean, he's wrong. Yeah, he's bad on everything, but he at least could form a sentence.
Well,
and remember how they said, like, oh no, Clint, he's just got a stutter and you're picking on him because you're such an ableist or whatever, right? No, he's completely losing it. And even in the 2020 campaign, remember him poking that guy in the chest and screaming at him about how I'm going to take your AR-14s away and all of that. There are quite a few kind of very strange outbursts like that. And that's a symptom of dementia, is that kind of anger for no reason sort of a deal.
Well, Mark Halperin says, breaking news, multiple sources outline the apparent state of play on Biden at this time. Plans to announce withdrawal from nomination as early as this weekend, with Sunday most likely. John Meacham polishing up remarks. So apparently the speech is already being written. So that's serious if so. Biden will not resign the presidency. Biden will not endorse Harris. Open convention with Harris and about 3 others. I'm guessing Whitmer, Newsom. I'm not sure who the fourth might be. Super delegates will not be allowed to vote on the first ballot, and Harris is vetting at least 4 possible running mates, including Andy Beshear and possibly Shapiro. I'm not even sure who that is. Probably some governor from a state I don't pay attention to.
Yeah.
But there you go. And Mark Halperin.
Wow. Ha! Ha You know, this is really the lead that we should have focused on at the beginning, was how hilarious it is that the Democrats are stabbing Joe Biden to the back with 500 knives and overthrowing him this way. It's so funny. Like, dude, nobody deserves to be betrayed and thrown in a gutter as bad as Joe Biden deserves it.
I thought you were going to say nobody deserves it. I was like, I think Joe probably does.
Oh, yeah. No. I just meant like no one nearly as much as him.
Yes.
I love it. Look, I'm very childish about this kind of stuff.
Scott, it gets a lot better. It gets a lot better. He's not going to support his VP, who he hand selected after he's bragged about how I'm going to, I got a black female Supreme Court justice. I have a black female vice president. And, I'm stepping down and also not endorsing my black female vice president to be the president. It's amazing.
Yeah. I wondered if he was going to, do like Yeltsin and resign and let her replace him and be the president for the last 3 months of the campaign here.
Well, if she was going to be the nominee, that would be very helpful to her. Yeah.
Yeah, although maybe that would just be too much like how Putin became president for Biden to do it. You know what I mean? Like the comparison is just so blatant that it's like cheating in that way for her. But yeah, it just speaks to her absolute weakness and his lack of faith in her, that he's not saying, okay, fine. You got me. I'm old and I'm just going to keep getting older and people don't like that, even though I'm just fine anyway. But like, you know what? My vice president, she's great.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like if I had to resign from the Libertarian Institute, don't you think I'd be like, let me sing the virtues of Keith Knight real quick on the way out the door here? Not like, well, we're going to have an open primary and decide who's going to run the Institute now.
It's an enormous condemnation of her, of her likability, her ability, period. I mean, it's vicious. But I love it because next to Joe Biden, I'm not sure there's anyone I fear being being president more than Kamala Harris, aside from actually Gavin Newsom or Gretchen Whitmer. All of the ones that they're going to put up are literal nightmare fuel.
Yeah. Well, and look, so what's the difference that got made in Biden's stubbornness here? It's Barack Obama. That's the news today. Yeah. And the news is not that Barack Obama called Joe Biden or went and visited him and had this talk. And the news is not that Barack Obama issued a statement. The news is Barack Obama's been talking a bunch of shit behind Biden's back to enough people that the word got out that Obama wants it known that he wants Biden gone, which is just so perfect.
Just pure backroom power play.
Yeah, the absolute backstabbiness of Barack Hussein Obama, the son of a bitch. Like he is just so horrible, dude.
Well, I knew the clock was ticking because last week there was a report that there was $90 million that had been donated to the Biden reelection campaign that was frozen by the donors themselves. And they said, we will only unfreeze this if you replace him. And I was like, oh, this is a donor coup. That doesn't happen without probably Obama or someone higher up that they actually respect saying, hey, if you want him gone, we have a way to do it. Freeze the funds. Sure, Trump's probably going to win, but we cannot have these hundreds of millions of dollars that hit the DNC for this election cycle not come flooding in, because then down ballot we get annihilated too. So I think this is a much more complicated play than most people think.
Well, look, I mean, this was exactly the message, and they leaked this all over the place, that Nancy Pelosi and Charles Schumer both went to him and told him, you're going to bring other Democrats down. You have to bow out of this thing. And
well, I mean, you knew it was coming because you had Democrat political, not just political operatives, media operatives, news journalists that were hammering the Biden administration on, like, you said that you were a bridge to the next generation, that you were going to pass the torch. Like, they were asking him this directly. As soon as you see that, they've been told from the highest level, okay, it's time.
Yep. And see, here's what's great, right? Is the Democrats' contempt for the people of this country, their contempt for the truth, has led them into this situation. They've done nothing but lie themselves into this corner where, look, appreciating their contempt for the American people, fine. How are you going to choose your best candidate? These are the people who gave us Kamala Harris, gave us Beto O'Rourke and Amy Klobuchar.
Pete Buttigieg.
You guys are going to love Amy Klobuchar. So
Her hair in a blizzard. Sorry.
How are you going to pick a candidate to be a strong candidate to face off against Trump in the general? Right. You ought to let the candidates stand in front of the American popularity contest and see whether anybody's going to show up to vote for you or not. Yep. And so now they canceled the primaries for a year. And they just lied to everyone, said, you're a liar. How dare you pretend that there's anything wrong with our great president? You know how sharp he is? Man, he's sharp. And so now they're screwed.
Sharp as a tack. Tack is a sharp. Sharp, sharp, sharp. Sharp as a tack. You said that on Dave Smith's show. That's so funny.
Dude, it was. It is like that. And people ought to look at this, or I don't know if your guy does show notes or whatever, but there's this wonderful video editor named Orf. It's 0RF. Okay, Orf. And he does these excellent video montages. And I know that you're familiar with at least one of them. If you go back to 2019 or 2018, maybe. God, is it that long already, Orf? He was the one that had that awesome montage of the walls are closing in. The walls are closing in. Flynn is going to turn on Trump and he's going to go to jail for Russiagate. Oh, it's the walls. They're closing in.
They're still closing.
They're still closing. And he had put together that great montage of like 10,000 times these idiots repeated that, you know? Yeah. And then, so this one is, it's just audio. The video, the picture is of Biden going, huh? And then the audio, though, is this collage of, I don't know, like 100 different claims from media stars. And if you're familiar with American media, you recognize a lot of these voices as like the most important American media stars saying Biden is so sharp. Man, he's sharp. Boy, is he sharp. He's so sharp. Sorry, I'm repeating the joke now.
No,
he's sharp. Sharp as be. Sharp as sharp is. Never heard of sharp before. He's sharp like knives and things. And then he like kind of fades it about halfway through. It fades over and it starts bringing in the tacks. Oh, he's sharp as a tack. Sharp, sharp, sharp. Tack, tack, tack. Sharp as a tack. Boy, is he sharp. Well, you know how tacks are? Real sharp. That's how Biden is. Sharp as a tack. And they just go over and over and over. And it's like, man, is somebody like pull out a magic coin and hypnotise them? Or like, how do you get all these people? It's just an email list that they're on?
It's an email list. It's a talking point email list. That's all it is.
But it's like an email list that reaches out and goes whoosh, and like fall in line. Yeah. Repeat this slogan, and they all do it.
Pravda. It's like they take their marching orders and they go. It is truly remarkable. But
so now, what are they going to do, Clint? Because this is the Democratic Party. They'll kill people endlessly in the name of democracy. They're killing people right now. They'll do anything. Except shoot the guy. They'll do anything to stop Trump because he's going to end democracy. It's the only thing they care about. And yet they won't let any of their own party members vote for their nominee to choose them.
That's
and
the
now
insanity.
that the primary season's over, they plan on rigging this ridiculous thing where they want to let Bill Clinton and Barack Obama choose like their top 6 people. That, of course, won't include Tulsi Gabbard or Bernie Sanders or anyone who's not in their favor.
Or RFK.
And then, I'm sorry?
RFK. RFK Jr.
RFK, that's right.
RFK Jr., I think if he was the Democratic nominee, Trump would be in trouble, potentially.
Maybe. I don't know. He's really, let's talk about that for a second.
Yeah. I know you're no fan. Let's go.
Well, and not even just like I don't like the guy, but on the political analysis just thing of it, that he might be the front runner to be the Democratic Party nominee right now if he had stayed a Democrat and if he was good on Palestine. And instead, not only is he bad on Palestine, but he's trying to be as bad as he can on Palestine. He'll tell any lie to justify the Israelis' violence against these poor people in their canned hunt over there, this merciless slaughter of these people. Tens of thousands of children killed already. And he is just so craven in his just abject servitude before this criminal foreign power, fighting on America's dime and in America's name, and engendering future terrorist attacks against American citizens. And meanwhile, like, who is he? I mean, you got a sitting Democrat. So what does that make RFK? If he's anything, he's the candidate of the dissident left, which doesn't have to be leftists, right? Doesn't have to be socialists, and he's not. He's a liberal.
It's actually more. It's more moderate, really.
Yeah. So that was all he had to be, was like a center left liberal, but who is fair. And he wouldn't have to be great. He wouldn't have to be perfect and heroic. He could just be somewhat decent on Israel, Palestine, and say, geez, I wish they would get a ceasefire and a two-state solution someday. Just feed me some pablum, anything. But nope, instead he'll tell any lie. You know what he said? He said that the Palestinian Authority, not Hamas, but Mahmoud Abbas and Fatah, that they have a bounty on the head of every Jew in the world and will pay anyone in the world to kill any Jew, which is such a lie. And of course, that's Robert Kennedy putting innocent Jews in danger when he says that, which is this total made up crap that he has to sling in order to justify his unjustifiable position.
He also described the Palestinians as the most pampered people in the world.
Oh yeah, it's just completely sick.
What?
Completely ridiculous. So, but then what's the counterfactual, right? He's good on Palestine and he stays in the Democratic race and endlessly complains that they won't hold fair primaries, and everybody knows that Biden is too old for this. My next door neighbor and my other neighbor on the other side, and everyone agrees that he's just too old. You need a new nominee, and it needs to be me. And if that was the case that he'd been making for the past year, or past, 3/4 of a year, he would be absolutely killing it right now. He would have the entire youth of the Democratic Party, the left, progressives, whatever, the students, the entire anti-war movement, the new kind of anti-Israeli war movement that grew up. He would be their champion. And by the way, the polls had between 70 and 80% of Democrats want a ceasefire and have this whole time over there. So that's not the left. That's not even progressives. That's just liberals and moderates, center left, Democrat, Hillary Clinton voters are sickened by this. He would absolutely be their champion. He would be a star right now. He would have momentum. He would have, panache.
He's pulling around like 15% as an independent. He's pulling around 15%. I mean, it's amazing.
Oh yeah.
If he was a Democrat nominee.
So if he was a Democrat right now, he'd have their back to the wall. You have to get rid of Biden, and then he would be their front runner by far.
This begs the question. This begs the question, Scott, because you and I know, you and I know because I read your book. I know because of you the history of Ukraine and Russia. He is pretty damn good on the Ukraine-Russia topic. How is it possible? I lean towards him being compromised for him being this bad. Like, if you're able to see the history of a very complex, multi-decade long escalatory trap that we've put ourselves into with Russia, if you can describe all of that, but you say the Palestinians are the most pampered people on the planet, like how does that happen?
Well, I agree with you. I think he must be compromised. Yeah. I presume that. He's been on. I don't have a rational explanation. There's not a credible report that he did anything on Epstein's plane or went to the island or anything like that. But he's palling around in those circles, and
he's had a very active sex life, to put it mildly.
Yeah, he's known for being a sex addict and driving his wife to suicide by cheating on her so many times and all that kind of thing.
Crazy stuff.
And so, I mean, this is how Israel does business, right? They go, hey, remember that pretty girl that we hooked you up with last night? Haha, she's 16. You're busted, dude. That's how they do it. They own your entire national government one way or the other through that.
Isn't this the perfect microcosm for American politics, that we have the three guys with any chance at all? Most of them are actually anti some war, but you can't get a single candidate ever in my lifetime at the presidential level that is actually non-interventionist, that actually wants to end wars. It's crazy.
I know. Well, and even Vance, his buddy Doubt That in the Times wrote that Vance is not a paleocon, Pat Buchananite, America First guy. He's a realist. He wants to take on China, not Russia. And, that's how RFK talks too. In other words, he agrees with one major faction of the Council on Foreign Relations. You know what I mean? This is very mainstream opinion that we should, that look, the global contest is for control of Eurasia. And if Russia and China are allied together, then we got to figure out how to stop that. And if China is the priority because they're the stronger partner,
right,
then you can either, one, win over the Russians and keep them with Europe and away from China, or you can be really smart like Joe Biden and lure them into a war in Ukraine, which is sure to weaken them, to bog them down and destroy them and weaken them in Eastern Europe. And then that way they won't be any good to China and will be weakened and essentially taken out of that equation, which of course has not worked, has only succeeded in pushing Russia toward China. And they have not a military alliance now, but they're closer than they have been since LBJ was in power.
Yeah.
And, you know, which was a decade before I was born. And,
a quick question for you. Because there's conflicting reports. Obviously, I haven't been to Russia to actually find out. You may know better than me. My understanding is that Putin is actually largely loved in Russia and supported quite broadly.
Yeah, I think that's
right. And that their economy is actually doing better than most of their neighbors
question
right
about
now.
that.
Okay,
Yep.
so that's all I wanted to know, because then online you'll get the hardcore Ukraine propagandists that are like, no, he's on the verge of, you know, being couped and toppled by his people. I'm like, that's not what I'm reading.
No way.
Okay,
that's not right. I mean, they'll go, man, he's facing a real crisis of confidence. His approval rating has gone down from 80% to 65.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Biden sits at 31.
Yeah. Hey, come on, man.
Here, real quick, I want to show you this latest footage, because the Hodge twins just put it out a minute ago. This is another angle of the attack on Donald Trump. It's kind of ridiculous that this guy pivots to himself right as the shots ring out, but it's still very close. So I want to watch it.
Arrow on the bottom. See the big red arrow? Take a look at that. So that arrow is the lowest amount of illegal immigration ever in recorded history into our country. And then the worst president in the history of our country took over. And look what happened to our country. Probably 20 million people. And you know, that's a little bit old, that chart. That chart's a couple of months old. And if you want to really see something that's said, take a look at what happened.
No, that doesn't really add anything.
Stay down. Get down. Hey, get down. Get down, guys. Holy shit.
So that's the front row vantage point. As I said, he pans away right when the first shot comes in. But I've been dying to get your read on this after it's been about 100 hours since the event or something like that. Personally, I've been covering this very closely because I'm not writing a book like you, so I have the time to do so. I am fairly convinced that the Secret Service received stand-down orders. I don't understand how you have a sniper that's in that position, an elevated position, like prime sniping spot, with a 20-minute gap from them actually seeing him on that roof. According to the reports that were given to the senators when upon direct inquiry from the senators to the head of the Secret Service, they say that there was a 20-minute gap between seeing him on the roof, then 10 minutes later, or 15 minutes later or so, Trump gets on the stage, and then 5 minutes later, the shots ring out. How is that at all possible, Scott? I know we're libertarians. We always assume that the government's incapable of accomplishing anything. It seems like that would be the one thing that they really don't ever mess up on, and they messed up in a way that's hard to believe.
All right. So worst case interpretation that I can think of is that they just would never give him enough men to really do the job, to secure a site. In other words, they left his ass hanging out there with their fingers crossed. Not even necessarily anyone at Secret Service, but maybe in the Biden White House.
Yep.
They're just going to not allocate, or maybe at the top of command of the Department of Homeland Security, they're not going to truly allocate enough protection, and they're going to hope that some kook gets away with something. That's about as far as I can go, because as far as the coordination of the guys on the ground there, I mean, we don't know. They haven't, as far as I know, they haven't said the name of who is the actual commander on the ground there that day. Is it one of the people we can see in the video, or it's someone who's sitting in a Suburban somewhere in a parking lot who's calling the shots, or what?
Yeah, I don't know who had the day-to-day like actual oversight. Cheadle, the head of the Secret Service, Kim Cheadle, is getting all of the heat.
Sure.
But I agree with you. I don't know on the ground that day. I don't actually know who was responsible.
And I do know. Look, okay, so I'll just go from like worst case there to Occam's razor, which is that cops suck. They're a bunch of big, fat, stupid, meathead idiots, and that's how they always are. And if you tell a cop, oh my God, there's an emergency at the thing, he'll say to you, why don't you go sit over there on the curb and I'll come talk to you in a minute, right? Like, that's just how they are, dude. They don't want to hear anything from anybody. That's their nature in the first place. You can't tell me something. You're not wearing the special jewelry. You don't know. You know what I mean? And there's footage of where the people are going, oh my God, there's a guy in the thing. There's a guy. And then what does the cop do? He moseys his fat ass over there. He's not hustling. He's just walking. And what's he doing? He's walking so close to the building that he can't see up on the roof.
Right.
Right.
But I will say this though, in their in local PD's defense, according to the most recent reports, in fact, one of the cops boosts another cop to the roof.
Right.
He grabs on the ledge. He pulls his head up. The gunman turns, points the AR-15 at him. Obviously, he lets go of the roof, collapses to the ground, injures himself. But my point in bringing that up is,
isn't it funny how there's no footage of that though? There's a lot of people pointing cameras at the guy.
True.
I know that they claim that. It makes no sense that they would peek up there without his Glock in his hand. You're talking about a potential sniper. What do you mean you put your eyeball up above the ridge line, but you weren't armed and ready to fire? Are you kidding?
No. But this is because he was getting boosted, not using a ladder. Because the initial reports were that he climbed a ladder, and I was like, wait, you climbed a ladder knowing that there's reports of a gunman and you don't draw before you go up? If he actually was getting boosted from his partner, grabs the ledge, lifts up, and then sees the gunman, drops down, that's more understandable. I'll grant you, it's not on video. We're taking their word for it. Hopefully they have body cam footage so we actually get a verification of this story. But what's even weirder to me, Scott, tell me if this makes sense. According to the other reports, there's a gap. There's a fairly significant gap between that encounter and the gun actually being fired. Why don't you pull back from the building, take your firearm, and shoot at the guy from the ground? Because the fans in the stands could see him. So, like, you don't do anything. You don't pull Trump from the stage. You don't fire at the guy. You don't do anything.
Right. So that's the most important thing, and that's really, we got to separate all these different things out if we can. But the first thing is that as long as there's a suspicious guy on the grounds, which, as we know, I think, as you said, he was reported almost an hour, like 56 minutes, I think they're saying before, that there's this weird kid running around and who's going to keep up with him. They kept losing track of him. He was on their radar two hours before. Then he became considered. 2?
Yeah, 2. And then about an hour prior to Trump speaking or to the gun going off, he is then like basically he's marked as like a potential threat. So he's on their radar 2 hours, then he's a threat an hour, and then he still gets into a position to fire. It's like, wow.
Well, if he's a poor kid and he reaches for his waistband, you blow his head off. Even if you know he's just pulling up his pants. You go, waistband, and then you murder him, because that's what it means to be a cop in America. That's your magic wish, get out of jail free card. I get to murder anyone I want. All I have to do is say waistband. In this case, I guess they got an American citizen on a roof. They can't necessarily see his rifle. According to the New York Times thing I saw today, he had placed himself with a tree in the line of sight between him and the closest sniper team so that they potentially would not be able to see him. It'd be the further away sniper team. And according to the New York Times sound expert analysis, it's the second sniper team, the one on the right, that takes him out.
Actually, that according to Bongino, that report is wrong. Dan Bongino is now a commentator, but he was Secret Service, so he's got a lot of inside information. He reported this morning that, in fact, it was not that sniper team that fired. If you look at the video, that sniper team looks as if they panic, like maybe one of the rounds actually got really close to them because they pull back from the rifle. That one dude drops down a little bit. So he's saying that it was actually another counter sniper team from a totally different vantage point that took that shot. And actually, when I played that video for you, if you hear the last round that goes off, I'm pretty sure that was the shot that took him out. According to Bongino, it was an 8-inch window by which he had to fire, and it was partially obstructed by a tree. So they shot through the trees to take out the sniper. Crazy shot if it's true. I don't know.
Well, so I mean, I'm not the sound expert. What the New York Times, their sound expert guy said that the shot came from 175 feet away, which perfectly matches the right-hand sniper team's distance away.
Okay.
So, either way, it's actually, you can see that they changed sides of the roof. They're originally pointed off the other direction. They switch which side of the ridge they're on and point back the other way again. And it would make sense that they would have been the ones to take the shot, since apparently he had maneuvered himself in a way that the closer sniper team wouldn't be able to see him very well, because there was one tree in the line of sight there, they say. But anyways, look, I think something important, and I'm not making excuses for these guys. I mean, if there's any kind of like deliberate blind eye being turned to this, anybody slow walking this or anything like that, like string their ass up, that's fine. But like, I don't think that just because they did such a lousy job that's the conclusion that we should jump to. Yeah, because you know, one thing that really happens in a crisis, especially, is the diffusion of responsibility, where nobody wants to just say, I'm the one in charge, and start barking orders. People start looking around to see who else is going to tell somebody else what to do, so that if something bad happens, and they're not necessarily thinking this through, but it's just kind of a natural reaction. If something really bad happens, it's going to be somebody else's fault, not mine.
Well, and that, just so you know, that's what's happening here. Secret Service is pointing the finger at local PD.
Right.
Local PD is saying, we followed your procedures to the T. At this point, it just... There's also disbelief too. If somebody tells you, hey man, you're right in the middle of world history's being written, you have 5 seconds to react. Of course.
You're like, nuh-uh. Like, if it doesn't feel that way to you, if you don't understand, then you don't understand. You know what I mean? And these are cops. They don't have any like real special insight. And like, I will say this though, the Secret Service though I don't know for sure, but I would imagine, based off of, you know, what I've seen of Bongino, a lot of these guys are like, hoorah, let's defend the president. Like, for them, it is a crowning achievement to take out a sniper. These are local cops over there, right? These aren't Secret Service. The Secret Service are 100 feet away or whatever, 100 yards away on the other side of a fence, a locked fence. They can't even get there. Do you see them with the truck trying to ram the gate open to even get out there? And they're all, to a man, every one of them, too damn fat to climb a chain link fence. Every one of them. They just sit there. Oh my God, a chain link fence. It's 7 feet high. What are we going to do? We have to wait till some guy crashes his Ford Explorer through the damn thing. They don't even try to climb it, Clint. They don't even try. None of them.
I saw it.
Right?
I know.
When there's like an assassin on the loose, which they don't know he's already dead at that point. But anyway, it's an emergency and all they can do is stand there. So it's the local cops. And what was I going to say? The sense of urgency, if you take a look at the footage that the civilians shot, where they're hollering, there's a guy on the roof, he's got a gun and all this. Still, what do? They just stand there and holler about it.
True.
Now, there's at least 4 or 5 fighting age males right there, and I know they're not armed. But we're talking about Donald Trump, whose rally they came to see, who's the former president, who's running for president in the United States, and a guy who's about to blow his goddamn head off.
Yeah.
And what do? They all
somebody do something
there and holler about it like a bunch of chimpanzees. And the one of them does not say to the other, well, fine, fuck it, let's go do this ourselves then. If the cops are just going to stand there, come on, Jimmy, and then we'll fight the guy. We'll die trying. Yeah. They don't. They just stand there. Why? Because they've diffused the responsibility away. It's a police officer's job to handle this, of course, which is true.
Yeah.
But when the cops don't do the job, what happens? Nobody does it.
Yeah.
Right? And if the Secret Service doesn't do the job, then the local cops don't do it. And if the local cops don't do it, the Secret Service doesn't do it. Oh, Tucker's up there. I wonder what he's saying about the Warhawks. I hope it's good. That'll be on YouTube in a minute.
Yeah, Scott, we're live. You can't tell people that Tucker's talking live. They'll go watch that.
Oh, sorry. Edit that out.
Anyways, yeah, look, I guess the reason I'm more skeptical of the official story than you are is that you've already spent from literally 2015, you are already preparing to manipulate the American perspective on Donald Trump, to spy on him, to frame him as being a traitor to the United States that is actually being funded and boosted through all sorts of means by Vladimir Putin, which is apparently supposed to be our arch nemesis, even though there's no real reason for him to be that. But that's the narrative that they began painting 9 years ago.
And they
then
impeached him on some bullshit.
Well, this is where I'm going with it.
Yeah.
Then you lie about him his entire presidency. You impeach him on the information that you had spied and created and concocted, the Steele dossier and everything else. I mean, and then you try to impeach him multiple times. 4 things that Joe Biden did. And then you try and remove him from the ballots. They tried to take him off the ballots in Colorado. They have done, and then at the very end of it, there's an attempt made on his life. Does that not seem like a natural escalatory ladder that just shows this is what they're doing?
I mean, I know that humans see patterns. Doesn't make them patterns, really. You know what I mean? Like, it's never that simple, or usually it's not that simple. Yeah. But, I would say, look, back to Dan Bongino. Somebody, is that how you say it, Bongino?
Yep.
Somebody posted a quote of him from last summer, almost a year ago, last August, saying Donald Trump is in danger. He doesn't have enough men. They haven't given him a good enough security detail.
True.
And freak out. And Tucker Carlson did. And Tucker Carlson complained about it on TV. And they actually ran a story about it in the AP about Tucker Carlson promotes conspiracies about a danger to Donald Trump. And that ran all over. If you search that article title or like a good quote out of it, you'll see that article ran in like 10, 20 places. Tucker Carlson pushes wacky conspiracy about lack of Secret Service protection for Trump.
Sure.
And so, look, whatever. People can just have faith, like whatever. If they want to believe in MK Ultra control of this kid's brain or whatever, you can just go there if you feel like it. I just don't see that. There are people who will do crazy shit. I could also
no doubt about that.
I could also see how, well, look, it's not even the argument ad absurdum. It's exactly relevant to this discussion. They refused to give any Secret Service protection to RFK.
Right.
And what does that say when he's a challenger on the left, can undermine Biden? I mean, that to me is some pretty severe body language. You're just supposed to be too polite to conclude that, wow, they want someone to kill that guy.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. I kind of think that they were hoping that someone would.
Well, I think that is the most.
Well, if that's true for him, then what does it mean when, they give Trump some guards, but not enough? And one more thing here. I saw an interview with a local, and he said Trump came and spoke last year or maybe it was previous when he was still the president. I think it was last year. He said he spoke at the airport. And at the airport, of course, there's a bunch of low buildings, the hangars. And he said there were police snipers on every single rooftop. Yep. And he said when he and his daughter went there, it was the first thing they noticed. They were so impressed by all the snipers. And they said, wow. And his daughter said, wow, never been so safe in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And then he said, when he showed up here, he said to himself, where's all the snipers, man? The first thing he did was scan the rooftops.
Wow.
And say, where's all the protection for my guy?
So he identified it right away.
If you want to interpret that in the very worst way that you can, go for it, bud. I'm with you. At the very least, if it's not deliberate, it's such criminal negligence.
Right.
When Biden owes Donald Trump an absolute force field of pure Kevlar and plasma, if he can somehow swing it, he owes Donald Trump every bit of protection that he can possibly provide for him, and then go ahead and lose fair and square, pal. Or go ahead and steal it fair and square, or whatever you got to do. But you don't leave the man's head hanging out to get sniped.
This is why people are scrambling for answers. But let me give you a little personal anecdote, because I was at LP National a month or so ago, and I actually spoke before Donald Trump went on the stage. Both me and Dave did. But I go in the back stage where Trump will eventually be. He's not there yet. I go out and I talk, then Rec goes out, then Dave goes out, and then I go in the back, and then I'm like, this is so cool. I'm gonna get to meet Donald Trump. I've never met a president. Not like I'm some big Trump fan, but I've never met a president. It'd be neat. And they're like, you got to go. Like, we haven't vetted you. Sure, you're running for the vice president under the Libertarian Party. We don't give a shit. Get the fuck out of here. And I was like, oh, okay, this is serious. Like, these guys really are not playing around. So the fact that you would know that there is a man, he had a rangefinder, Scott Horton. He had a rangefinder that is exactly what a sniper would use to figure out, bullet drop and everything else, to make sure that, and also to be able to spot the counter sniper teams, to figure out what location you might go to where you can actually get off a shot. They saw him with that a full hour before. I struggle to believe that you don't immediately detain the guy and say, what the fuck are you doing here with a rangefinder? Had I had one in the back, had I had some sort of paraphernalia that's militaristic in the back before Trump came in, I think they would have fucking locked me up until he was done talking. That's just my opinion. I could be totally wrong.
I mean,
it's just weird.
You would have to have the commander on scene, in on it, not in on the shooting necessarily, but you would have to have him in on a plan that, listen, if you're ever in charge of security one day and there's a real lethal threat to Trump, you are to turn a blind eye and allow that Trump to go ahead.
But that's really basically the only guy you need to have.
Go ahead.
That's the only guy that you really have to have in on it, though, because he's the one giving the orders.
That's a hell of a thing, though. That's a hell of a thing, man. I don't know.
It's a big deal, but I would like to have an investigation into, is that man compromised for any reason? Is there a justifiable explanation? Just give me that. If you have one, great. But the guy who was supposed to post that rooftop, because they identified that was like a top threat, and that happens to be the roof where the guy who had that post doesn't show up that day. No one fills in for him, and then you also don't stop the guy, and you also don't see him before he gets the shots off, and also you let Trump take the stage. Oh yeah, and also you don't remove him from the stage. Get the fuck out of here. That's crazy. Yeah.
Although, wait, so I'm sorry. What was it? You just mentioned a thing that I hadn't heard before. Now I'm trying to remember what it was.
I know, it was a big rant. I can't remember. I don't know which part was novel to you.
You're saying one of the local cops didn't show up that day?
I don't know if it was Secret Service or local cop, but according to Dan Bongino, the guy who had that station, because it was a formal station, was supposed to be on that roof to make sure there's no threats there, doesn't show up for work that day.
Yeah.
Weird.
I don't know, man.
And then the sniper, this 20-year-old kid with no training, no military background, who was kicked off his rifle team in high school, he happens to find that location where the guy who's not supposed to be, or who was supposed to be there but isn't there that day, he finds that roof, he gets up on top, and he's not stopped. There's just a ton of, like, yes, sure, it's systemic catastrophic failure, any negligence. Dead. Yeah, he's dead. You can't ask him shit. Oh, by the way, his phone, he's got two phones as a 20-year-old. Weird. Also, one of them has like 27 contacts, and the other one they couldn't get into for hours or for days and days, but they were still confident in reporting to the American people, we know he worked alone. Oh, you can't get into his fucking phone, but you already know he worked alone. How? Oh, also, he's a 20-year-old without social media. Fucking weird. There's so many layers to this that are strange. I'm not saying he's some MK Ultra guy. I don't know. Maybe he's just some crazy kid who was ultimately, told through Steam he was playing video games. He sent $1,600 to some OnlyFans broad. Maybe some OnlyFans broad is being used as a CIA asset to try and radicalize some dude. And she's like, this is a great idea. I hate Trump. Go do this. I don't know. I'm just saying there's a lot of weirdness.
There's certainly a lot of weirdness.
I know. I'm flooding Scott Horton. Sorry.
No, look, I agree with you. And one of the things that maybe it's a flaw of mine, Clint, is that I'm a former conspiracy kook, right? I'm a New World Order
so you're
guy.
hesitant to go along with it. I get it.
I'm a New World Order guy, and I was wrong about that. Like, anybody who thinks that this is all about building a one world government under the UN, like, no. Obviously, okay, tell you what. You go let Putin know that that's what he's in on, and I'll wait here for you to get back.
but Scott, what about JFK, RFK Sr., Martin Luther King?
Well, so that's the thing is, yeah. So, look, I got a joke about JFK really in this one. We're like, in this case, this kid, at least they're saying, he worked at the hospice making Jell-O for dying old ladies, right? Like, he's an absolute nobody. And like the lone nut thing. So I'm like, at least on the face of it, that's plausible. But now, like, transpose that on 1963. We're like, look, the guy was just a lone nut. And no, his job was not making Jell-O down at the local hospice. Actually, his job was well, he was a Marine stationed at a top secret U-2 base in Japan.
Right.
And then he had defected to Russia and lived there for
He also went to Cuba for a while. No big deal.
Cuba. And then some guy using his name but looked nothing like him showed up at the embassy in Mexico City. And by the way, he was a big advocate for the communists in Cuba, but at night he was always socializing with a bunch of right-wing Russian exiles. And like, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Okay. He was CIA, but he's not anymore. He certainly wasn't on the day that he killed the president to death, Clint. Okay. I gotta say, if I can buy the lone nut theory here, I don't think I can with Oswald.
Yeah, right.
I'm pretty sure that parallels break down when you look at Oswald's illustrious career in the lead up to all of that. But yeah, and look, as you said, and quite correctly, I mean, they framed him for treason. The FBI and the CIA took on the obvious front runner for the nomination, then a major party nominee for president, then the president-elect, and then the president himself.
Yep.
And framed him for treason with the Kremlin of all things, like he's Alger Hiss or the Rosenbergs. You gotta be kidding me, man. He's Harry Dexter White. Donald Trump is Harry Dexter White. Got that? And it's just incredible. Even thinking back about it, it's insane.
It's
and honestly,
amazing.
and I said that, and I guess I believe that, right? It's just a hair from driving him through Dallas and getting him shot. Like the degree to which they would go to limit his presidency, it's incredible. It's just incredible. As you said, with the impeachment and all of the manufactured scandal and all the rest of it. And so, people have asked me recently, well, what can they do to stop him at this point? And I said, kill him.
Right.
And then like a couple days later, this happened. So like, I noticed patterns too.
Of course.
I guess I do have to reiterate though, that I don't really see, well, so far you're right. It's a big open question. We don't really know, but just use my imagination to fill in the gaps here. Doesn't really seem to me like some powerful person manipulated this kid into doing this. And it's one of the things that
Scott, before you go down that line of thinking, you have to also like consider that he's not the one that actually maybe he's firing, but also maybe there's another guy firing, because we have multiple sound signatures. Yes, it's undoubtedly the counter sniper team takes the shot to take him out, but there's also different shots that, according to sound analysis, comes from 3 different locations. So I don't know at this point.
According to who? I want to see that. I don't.
Yeah, I mean. Here, give us 60 seconds. I hate to cut us off. We'll be right back. Today's episode of Liberty Lockdown is brought to you once again by sheathunderwear.com. They sent me a whole bunch of pairs, and I love these things. They're the most comfortable, high-quality boxer briefs I have ever owned. Moisture-wicking, keeps everything cool and separated. I only wear them at the gym because the rest of the time I go commando, but you can wear them all the time, and I would recommend that you do because they're fantastic. So for 2024, step up your underwear game. Graduate from holes, loose fabrics, cheap cotton briefs that bunch up, and buy the greatest underwear that's ever graced the balls of man. Sheath underwear, the underwear of legends. Like Michael Malice and Dave Smith, for instance. Sheath can be worn as regular boxer briefs, or you can use the incredibly high-tech sheath pouch to keep everything separated, if you so choose. I wear these only at the gym, like I said, but they are legitimately the most comfortable pair of boxer briefs I have ever owned. The website is fully stocked with different designs, winter-based layers to keep you warm, ladies' apparel, and more. So go to sheathunderwear.com and use code LIBERTY, and you're going to get 20% off. Once again, sheathunderwear.com, promo code LIBERTY. That's SHEATH, underwear.com, promo code LIBERTY for 20% off. Let's get back into the show. And we're back with Scott Horton as I try to convince him that this is an inside job. No, as I've been very clear with my audience. I did an episode 48 hours ago that said everything we knew after 72 hours. And basically my conclusion is this stinks to high hell, but I can't come to a conclusion. But they clearly want this guy out. And I think this is a good natural next question for you. Is it simply that he's just not as on board with the war machine as their puppet Joe Biden is?
That's a good question.
Because he's not great otherwise. So why the fuck do they fear this guy so much?
Yeah. Okay, put that off for just 1 second, because I do want to
Sure.
say this about the shooter kid. Like, you know, the Parkland shooter, and there's been a lot of different school shooters, but the Parkland kid, if you remember him, I knew a kid that was just like that. He was just like that. And he ended up dying in a shootout with the Williamson County Sheriffs. His name was Chris. And I liked him. He was a friend of mine, or like a friend of a friend, but I liked him. He had a good spirit in a way. But he was also like, he was a crazy freaking kid, man. And I remember him saying, it would be so funny, dude. It would be so funny. He had a Tech 9. It'd be so funny to take this to the mall and just shoot a bunch of people just to see him screaming and running. Ha 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 ha. That'd be hilarious. And I'm like, but dude, you're talking to innocent people and like their families who gotta like cry over them and shit. And he's just like, what? Like, yeah. Wow. And it wasn't long after that he died in a shootout with the cops. He's just a crazy ass kid, and he's the kind of kid who would have done something like go to school and shoot a bunch of people.
But here's the thing, Scott.
People like that.
He told you some of his weird thoughts. According to the other students that were at school with him, no one at least has come forward yet that is saying this guy told us that he was violent, that he had violent tendencies or dreams of being violent. Like, there's no reports of that. The only thing we have so far is that his Steam account, a video game account online for online gaming.
I'm making a more general point, which is this country is lousy with guns and violent men. And even like in the case of Oswald, it's a bad example, but or take like, I don't know, Charles Whitman or something. They're like, you can have just some jackass,
of course,
with a rifle cause an incredible amount of damage. And especially if you're talking about an assassination of a high profile political figure. Like, just take any conspiracy and Secret Service malfeasance and negligence and whatever out of this for a minute. Just like in the hypothetical situation that this loser kid had shot Trump in the head, right? If Trump hadn't turned and he had got it here, think how much less, Clint, you would want to hear it, that this kid had no connections, that the Secret Service is just fat and stupid and lazy and they don't communicate well, and the person with eyeballs on the kid was not the person calling the shot, and the person calling the shot called the wrong shot and said wait or whatever. You would be really dissatisfied with the idea that this virgin loser idiot can take out a legend like Donald Trump, the most famous American who ever lived, right? So all I'm saying is, like,
and I'm not even a supporter, and I would be pissed. The people that are his supporters would be radicalized in a way that's hard to even describe.
Yeah, and you can feel the same way about, like, you don't have to be conspiratorial about it, but it's the same kind of spirit. If you heard about that drunk lady that killed the 3 ball players last week or 2 weeks ago, is in Northern Virginia, is one of these kids just got drafted into the NFL, and he was with his 2 friends who were his college football star best friends. The 3 of them were best friends. And it's 3 a.m, and I think they're sitting at a red light. Maybe they were rolling. I think they were sitting at a red light, and drunk lady just hits them and runs them off the road, and they hit a tree, and they're all dead, all 3 of them.
It's terrible.
And you're like, this stupid piece of shit, this worthless person took out these 3 legends, these 3 guys who deserve to live. Like, it seems very incongruent that someone without juice could hurt someone with so much power, and through just such a stupid way, right? Running a red light or swerving out of her lane. You know what I mean? So not to explain that stuff away, but to explain the inclusion of, like, why we prefer to have an elaborate explanation for an event that potentially would have such a great impact. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Like,
and then now, why do they hate him so much? They hate it. I don't know why they hate him so much. Like, as a foreign policy establishment overall, I think really just because he's so damn rude and narcissistic and doesn't really play ball with them. He was essentially recruited by the Clintons to be their foil. And I don't think that they ever told him that.
No.
But he's probably smart enough to understand it. But Bill Clinton told him, yeah, you ought to do it, Donald. I think you'd be great. That's a fact. And it's also a fact that they had the Pied Piper strategy, in which people might be more familiar with. This just happened in the last midterm elections. The Democrats quite openly and quite deliberately donated to the most wingnut MAGA House candidates.
Yep.
In the hopes that they would win the primaries.
Yeah, they're more defeatable.
So that they would be the easier one to beat in the general election. That's the math. And it worked. And in fact, in every case, I believe in every case that they did that for the House races in 22, it worked for them.
Wow.
Okay. That was the same strategy they were doing with Donald Trump. But the problem is Hillary Clinton is Hillary Clinton, and people just hate her guts, dude. They just don't want to support her. And like, yet all these white people who showed up to vote for Barack Obama stayed home for her. She said they were all racists is why, which is funny because her name is Hillary, which is like, isn't that the name of the snob in Caddyshack? Like, that's the most like stuck up little blonde girl name you could have. But anyway.
Here's a question for you, because I'm convinced that like the main thing that he opposes that would really, really rub them the wrong way is basically the war against Russia. And it seems as if the Biden administration, I'm setting Biden aside because I really don't think he's called the shots whatsoever. I think Anthony Blinken and Newland and the real deep state that runs shit. It seems to me like they are dedicated to having a war against Russia. And Trump has been very, very loud forever that he doesn't want to do that. Yes, I know the history that he gave them weapons, but setting that aside, it does seem as if he's serious, that he doesn't want war with Russia, that he thinks that we ought to be on better terms with them. And it seems to me like that's what they want. So my question for you is, you wrote the book on it, why we can't win a nuclear war and why all wars between nuclear powers ultimately escalate into nuclear holocaust. What the fuck are they doing?
Well, okay, it's all about China, no matter whose side you're on. The question is, how do we divide Russia away from China? And Kissinger and Trump, and I guess Obama thought, at least at first Obama thought, that what we want to do is we want to cozy up to Russia. We want to cooperate with them. We don't want to give them too much decision-making authority, but we want to more or less get along with them,
right?
Keep them in Europe. And, he must have known what was going on to some degree, but you look at his Ukraine policy in 2014, it kind of looks like Biden and Newland and those guys were just running wild, and maybe Obama was letting them get away with it. But I sure haven't seen much reporting that he was pushing for all that they did in backing the Maidan Revolution and all that at that time. He seems to have sort of let them run wild.
I think that was State Department. I don't think he had much to do with it.
Yeah, but so Trump had said, I talked to Henry Kissinger, and he said, wow, Donald, you're the smartest person I've ever met in the whole world, and you're so tall and wealthy and successful, and I agree with you that we ought to be friends with Russia to split them away from China. That was his retelling of the story, right? But so then there are others who thought, no, what we'll do, and this is the Biden policy, is we'll bog the Russians down in a war in Eastern Europe, and that will weaken Russia, and so they won't be any good to China. And they'll be essentially de facto split away because they'll just be up to their eyeballs in their own problems in Eastern Europe.
Why give up? Why give up on the strategy of befriending Russia? Because that seemed as if there was an open pathway to do so. Why not bring them into NATO? If you really want to divide them from China, bring them into NATO.
See, this is why I was such a New World Order kook in the 1990s, Clint, was because there were people who talked like that. It wasn't just total harebrained stuff. The Russians often talked that way, and there were Americans who talked that way.
Right.
And in fact, there was a Tom Clancy book, which I took as like, it's part of kind of the Washington consensus anyway, where Russia gets into a war with China and America brings Russia into NATO, and America helps Russia defeat China in a war. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's funny, I was talking on the phone with Dave about my new book that I'm working on. And it only occurred to me while I was talking this over with him that in fact, chapter 1 and chapter 2 of my new book, Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton, in a way, those chapters are me grappling with how wrong I was about what was going on at the time. and now kind of re-understanding that era from not John Birch, One World Order kook, but instead really seeing what they were doing, which was really all at the expense of Russia. Russia is big and they have all these H-bombs and they want to be treated with equal respect. The Americans are not willing to treat them with equal respect or even like give them Germany or Britain's status inside our alliance. That's sharing too much power. We lord it over the Brits and the Germans. This is what we're doing. And they're like, okay. But we wouldn't be able to do that with the Russians. There's too many competing interests. We'd have to take them into account too much. And our National Security Council is perpetually run by Dick Cheney and his ghost, right? Their idea is you guys can get in line or get bent. Right. We don't need the UN Security Council. We got the U.S. National Security Council, and that'll be good enough. Our power is strong enough that you'll just have to fall in line.
So they perceive China as the number one threat, but they perceive Russia as too major of a player to give them a seat at the table because they'll demand too much respect, and we're not going to give up that much power.
So we're not going to go that far. So instead we get Joe Biden's policy, which is start a war in Ukraine, bog them down, bleed them to bankruptcy on the Afghanistan model, weaken them, as George Friedman from Stratfor puts it, hit them. When Russia gets strong, you hit them. When Iran gets strong, you hit them. When China gets strong, you hit them. Keep them off balance. Keep them spending money. Mm-hmm. They're distracted in Ukraine, overthrow Kazakhstan, right? Like this is how they think. This is how they do. And it's what caused this war.
Since I think we both agree that it's really not the president of the United States that's like ultimately deciding foreign policy, certainly not under the Biden administration and probably not under Obama, certainly not under Trump because he tried to get out of Syria and they're like, fuck you. So who is it that is really making these decisions, do you think?
Well, it's, I think it's so telling. The stories that came out of Trump's impeachment. Remember Alexander Vindman?
Yep.
Who is like one of the rats who tried to pretend that Trump's call with Zelensky was some extortion, that if you don't indict Joe Biden, then I won't give you missiles, which is something that he never said. And they just embellish that thing. I mean, I have these quotes in my new book. It's really something else. If you go and look at Vindman's testimony to the Congress, as well as an article he wrote for The Atlantic and a couple of other things, he really emphasizes in the plainest of language where he's not embarrassed and doesn't know he should be. And this is a Ukrainian American national, a colonel in our army, but he's Ukrainian in the first place. This is his home country, not our country. And he just outright says that the problem here was that President Trump was trying to change our foreign policy.
Yep.
And who is our foreign policy? Our foreign policy is the foreign policy of the interagency. The interagency? What the hell is that? And it turns out that all it means is like the deputies committee meeting, right? Where the deputy secretary of state and the deputy secretary of defense and the deputy director of the CIA and whoever, the National Security Council, junior staff, forge the consensus. This is what we're doing. The government agencies, minor leaders say, this is what we're doing. Then they bring the bosses in and they go, this is what we plan. What do you guys think, bosses? And the bosses either agree or not, or if they disagree, then they take it to the president and they go, Mr. President, you break the tie. But the policy is determined by them. And of course, Trump is so inept that he let his NSC be full of enemies. Right. Vindman was placed there by John Brennan just to get his ass. And Trump was too distracted watching the women talk about him on TV news to actually take care of business. But Vindman is adamant over and over that the president of the United States has no right. Who in the hell does he think he is to change our permanent policy? The United States has a Ukraine policy. And I don't give a damn what election this guy won. He doesn't get to overturn it. And Vindman just makes it clear that was his motive for turning Trump in, pretending he had committed some crime. and turning him in and getting him impeached was because Trump was trying to take policy away from a lieutenant colonel who thought that he had made the call. You know?
It's totally nuts, man. I was just trying to pull up the testimony from Vindman, because I remember reading that in the book, but I haven't seen that testimony in years. But I people can look it up on their own. It's true. That's what he says. He's like, the commander in chief was going against our policy, and it's like, oh, so he's not the commander in chief, obviously. And I guess so. Your thesis is that it's basically just this bureaucratic hydra, that there is no ultimate decision maker. It's just a whole bunch of blood-soaked warmongering lunatics that propose craziness. See, the reason I struggle with this is, like, I know, like, China, for instance, or Russia, it seems as if they have a longer term, multi-decade plan, particularly China does, clearly, with the Silk Road and everything else, where it's like, this is what we're going to do to help our nation, to progress our nation and keep us in a position of power. Well, it feels like me like you need someone that's actually game planning this a little bit, but your thesis is it's just the intelligentsia, the intellectual elites in DC, the think tankers.
Yeah. I mean, well, look, I mean, there's an ideological consensus about preserving American power in Europe and Asia to the nth degree as long as possible.
Yeah.
And the question is how to implement that. And then, you know, when I say, like, the deputy committee, again, that's the deputy secretary of state and the deputy secretary of defense and et cetera, like that. So the joint chiefs of staff, they have what's called the joint staff. They're long-term, short-term, medium-term strategic planning staff. And they say, this is how we want to approach this or that. In fact, if you go back 10 years or so, I just added this footnote to the book, I think the other day, where I found this sort of funny, candid discussion from the Obama years about how, well, the U.S. Navy really wants an anti-China policy. And so America's foreign policy is now kind of bending around that and getting used to the idea that we're now going to take a more aggressive stance against China. Well, why would they do that? You already know the answer. Money, cocaine, and whores. That's why. And the U.S. Navy is so corrupt. You heard of the Fat Leonard scandal, where it's just all these kickbacks. It's nothing but drugs and whores all over. That's all they're doing, is enhancing their own power. If you leave it up to the Navy, of course, the Navy thinks we need more ships and more planes and more bombs and more enemies for them to confront. That's why it's not supposed to be up to them. Well, it's just like letting the Israelis decide your Middle East policy. You got the flea wagging the dog. Yeah. Well, the Navy should shut the hell up and do what, I don't know, some congressional committee decides our policy should be. What the president decides our policy should be. Right. Rather than, boy, we have these really powerful interests over in the Department of the Navy who we have to keep happy. What? Right. That's not how it's supposed to work. Although that's what George Washington would have predicted, right? That's the standing army that our founders warned us about. That's how it works. If you let them create a standing army, they'll find reasons for putting it to work.
And it will ultimately bankrupt you. And it is. So here's what I don't understand with Trump. Like, so if it were purely, like, there has to be an ideological backdrop to this decision making, or some sort of game planning to this decision making, because if it was just about feeding the military industrial complex, you go, look, yeah, Trump doesn't really want war, but JD Vance, who he just brought on as his VP, he's crazy about Iran. He's also not good on China. Like, we can still feed the military industrial complex. We'll find a way to definitely keep them fed. We can just continue to send munitions to Israel, and then we'll send it to some other nation to go mess with Iran. We'll keep our guys paid. But that's not enough. That it's not enough at all that Trump is that much of a danger. You got to get rid of him. So there has to be the strategy of, like, we're going to bankrupt Russia, even though we're sending hundreds of billions of dollars. They're sending hundreds of thousands of men. We're sending hundreds of billions of dollars. It's bankrupting us too. What is the, at this point, because it's evolved a lot since we last talked, it's quite clear at this point that, you know, Ukraine is getting annihilated and they've lost almost all fighting age young men. It's just absolutely tragic, or they fled. Do you think, like, what do you think the game plan is from here? Because you can't win unless you bring NATO in. So are they going to bring NATO in?
Yeah. Well, two things there. So first of all, that's the New World Order. The New World Order is not a one world government under the UN that takes over America. The New World Order, as George Bush Sr. meant it when he said it, is the American empire rules the world. Yeah. Everybody does. In fact, that was his exact quote. What we say goes. Mm-hmm. In other words, as Biden puts it, it's the liberal rules-based international order.
Yep.
What he means by that is not the UN charter that all these countries signed on to, but what America wants.
Right.
That's the rules they're referring to. Mm-hmm. What America wants, the rules-based order. We've decided, now you will obey. And so that's the true ideological, because you're right, it's not all about the money, right? No. It's not all just the dirty snowball, although there's a hell of a one. Of course, it's the biggest imperial court ever that anyone ever built. But there's an ideology of American empire, right? That's based, I'm sure there are people who, are actually smart and can really delve into this stuff about going back to the Yankee Puritans and their, central core belief that America was created by divinity and to lead mankind and whatever, to be they called it the new Israel. And it was going to be not just a shining city on a hill, but a laser designator to blow your ass away if you're not going to get in line with the divine plan for remaking the world the way it's supposed to be. And then, of course, you got the Scotch Irish. They just like to fight. So they're like,
you combine the two, you got to
get along.
You combine the two, you got a real dangerous ideology.
That's right. Like after the Civil War, they joined forces to go kill off the last of the Indians and steal the rest of the West. Mm-hmm. Because they had, on one hand, God wants us to do this. And on the other hand, woohoo, this is fun. Let's kill people and steal things. And
we are God's chosen children and we love to kill people. What That's a dangerous combination.
Yep. And then, as I always say, George Washington and Thomas Jefferson are long gone. It's Franklin Roosevelt and Harry Truman who are the true founding fathers of America now. Ooh, they're the ones who founded the American Empire after World War II. And they are invoked as the founding mythology of the country and of the world empire. And the story is that Hitler was taking over the world and America lazily refused to get involved and stop them because of the dreaded isolationists. And America should have allied with Britain and invaded Germany as soon as they broke their promise and invaded Czechoslovakia in 1938. And instead, we waited around until Hitler invaded Poland, and then England attacked Germany. And then only after the Japanese finally came for us at the end of 41 did America finally get involved in the war, after having helped allow evil to conquer all of Europe.
Churchill's what was it called? Appeasement.
That's right, by appeasing Hitler and refusing to confront him, and leading to a situation where by the time we got in and helped win the war, the Soviets had taken all the land all the way up to Berlin and were able to keep it. And there was nothing that we could do about that. And the lesson there is always start the wars from now on. All compromise is appeasement. All foreign adversaries are Hitler. And we're never the ones who are the aggressors who need to be appeased, by the way. It's always the other guy who is. And which is funny, I don't know if you saw this, but when Putin declared war in Ukraine, he actually made his own Neville Chamberlain at Munich comparison. But instead of invoking Neville Chamberlain at Munich, he invoked Molotov at Moscow, where Molotov and Ribbentrop had signed the Hitler-Stalin Pact, right? The peace, the temporary peace between Hitler's Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union before Hitler turned around and betrayed him 2 years later and attacked in Operation Barbarossa there. And so Putin says the same thing. We tried to appease Germany, and that didn't work out too well for us. We should have attacked him right then when he invaded Czechoslovakia. So the lesson is we better not appease the Americans in the same way. We have no right to do so, he says. So the Russians also invoke the same founding myth of America. anybody ever tried to compromise with Hitler. Except the problem with that is Hitler is Hitler. And it's pretty hard to just say that any autocrat who wants anything anywhere is Hitler in motivation or capability in any way. And Germany was unquestionably the premier military power in Europe. There was nothing to compare to the Third Reich at the time of the start of that war. And those circumstances and his fanaticism and all of those things, that you can't just apply that wherever you want, but that's what they do.
I will say this though. I think before the war between Russia and Ukraine, I don't think that Russia was even close to probably being a dominant enough military that it could threaten really any of the major European nations. But now that they've ramped up their production, they're probably sitting on a stockpile and lineup of different battle machines that does actually threaten some of these nations. Do you think that Putin is that guy? Because based off of his words, he's been very clear. We will only ever go to war with Poland if they were to attack us. We will only we're never going to strike NATO. Like, all of this is nonsense. Right. Do you take him at his word when it comes to that?
Well, not because he says so, Scout's honor, but just because of the circumstances. And if you look at his behavior, it matches very closely with what he said. And, unfortunately, right before the war, he played very coy and said, no, I'm not going to invade. When what he should have been saying is, you're damn right I'm about to invade. Look at how angry I am. And you better come to the table finally and negotiate. He might have been able to pull it off if he'd been more straightforward there. Although I guess military necessity supposedly required diplomatic incompetence in that way.
And hadn't he been sending that message for years and years? So don't you think, like, at that point it's kind of like, well, now I have to prepare tactically and catch them off guard?
Yeah, well, yes, he had been threatening off and on that he could invade Ukraine if they would not implement the Minsk II deals and that kind of thing. In 2014, he said I could be in Kiev in 2 weeks.
Right.
And he clearly had been building up a massive invasion force inside Russia and Belarus on the other side of the border there, and was demanding that America and NATO sign a new treaty guaranteeing Ukrainian neutrality and that they'd stay out of NATO and these kinds of things in the lead up to the war. So at the very least, he was playing a very tough game of coercive diplomacy there. But what was it that he was demanding? What he was demanding essentially was that, I mean, in the larger sense, that America live up to our obligations, but in the Ukrainian sense, he was demanding that Kiev implement Minsk II, that they protect the rights of the people of the Donbass. And then once he had enough and said he was invading on the 21st and the 24th, then he said, well, now I'm guaranteeing the independence of these eastern regions. And he said over and over, he's protecting the rights of ethnic Russians who were left behind when the Soviet Union fell apart and who are being killed. And that he's saying, he's responding to his duty to protect these people. And if you guys will not implement the peace deal that we already agreed upon, then I'm going to have to go ahead and intervene the hard way here. And he's been very clear about that. And now there are ethnic Russians left behind in many former Soviet states. And so then the question is, well, are they being oppressed? And if so, how badly?
Right.
And so, like, there's
how many former Russian states are not in NATO at this point?
Well,
it can't be many.
None of the South Asian states, right? None of the stands. So the Baltics are all in. Belarus and Ukraine are not. Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan are not.
Okay. I forgot the stands. My bad.
Yeah. And
I forgot that was former USSR.
You know, there's kind of a funny anecdote about this, Clint, where when they were talking about when they were first talking about bringing Finland in, and this isn't consistent, he contradicted himself and talked like a tough guy after this. When they were first talking about bringing in Finland, I had the idea that maybe Putin was on muscle relaxers or something that day, because he had like given this really chill answer where he's like, look, man, we don't have a border problem with Finland. We don't have any outstanding issues with Finland. So quite frankly, we don't care if they join NATO. What difference does that make?
Interesting.
The problem with bringing Ukraine into NATO is that Crimea belongs to us, but Kiev won't admit that. Kiev swears they're going to take it back. Well, if you bring Ukraine into NATO, then that means war between Russia and NATO.
Right.
Don't you see what position you're putting us in there? And when, after the coup, the American and Nazi-backed coup d'etat of 2014, and then they sent, Barack Obama sent John Brennan, the head of the CIA, right over there to start the war. They started killing these people for refusing to recognize the power of the new coup d'etat junta, and Putin vowed to protect them and eventually did send in special operations forces to help them in August of 14 and February of 15 to beat back the Ukrainian army and force them to negotiate the Minsk II deal. And he always, look, it was 8 years later he invaded, dude. It was 8 years later. Why didn't he invade then? Well, because he hoped to avoid such a calamity, right? He was trying to negotiate.
Why
Barack
didn't
Obama had put his rubber stamp on the deal, so what's the problem?
Why didn't Russia, when they gave Ukraine its independence, why didn't they take Sebastopol and just leave that formally, or Crimea broadly?
Good question.
What? Yeah, why not? Why not make that formally Russia?
It would have led to a major diplomatic crisis right when they were falling apart,
Okay.
and trying to stay on the good side of the Americans. And it would have ruined their relationship with the Bush administration if they had a big fight about it. I have a section on that in the book. And in fact, there's a famous press conference where the Ukrainians had pushed for independence, like full independence. And the Russians were a bit surprised by that. I mean, Yeltsin had negotiated the accords where they finally broke up the Soviet Union and just created the Confederation of Independent States in its place. But they still thought that they were going to have this special relationship with Ukraine. And the new Ukrainian government was like, no, forget you guys. And we're really being more and more separate. So there was this press conference where the Russian spokesman gets into an argument with a Ukrainian journalist. And if I can get this anecdote right, forgive me, my Joe Biden brain. Essentially, he's saying, or she's asking, he's complaining. You guys don't want to be in this enhanced relationship with Russia? What the hell? And she says, well, that's a legacy of communism. Any relationship between our country and Russia then would be a legacy of communism. And he goes, oh, yeah? Well, the Donbass and Crimea belonging to Ukraine is a legacy of communism, too. So maybe we'll just take those back, young lady. Right? So this was a controversy from the very beginning. Absolutely. At the time of the breakup of the Soviet Union. And Putin complains in his declarations of war from 22 that the communists drew these borders in a way to include ethnic Russians in Ukraine to like dilute Ukrainian power, and to have control of those natural resources in eastern Ukraine. But it didn't really matter that land was being quote unquote given to Kiev because they were all answerable to the Kremlin anyway under Soviet communism. Yep. The same reason it didn't really matter when Khrushchev gave Ukraine Crimea in 1954, which it had always belonged to Russia up until then. But he gave it to Crimea in 54 because he needed the Ukrainian Communist Party's support to help him succeed Stalin.
Okay.
And so he gifted it to them, but what difference did it really make, as Hillary would say, because everybody was still just answerable to the Kremlin. Now the Soviet Union falls apart and Ukraine gets control over these extremely Russian regions in the far east of the country and on the Crimean Peninsula. And this is, of course, an immediate controversy. And then what the Americans did was instead of letting them have a balance, think of like Texas, half Anglo and half Hispanic. Well, are we going to fight about that or are we going to not? right? Like, let's not have a big fight between the Anglos and the Hispanics in Texas. That could go really bad. And no one's going to win anything out of it. It's going to be horrible for everyone, right? And so instead of letting, like our current status quo we have in Texas, where we all pretend not to notice the difference because who really cares anyway, and we get along, instead the Americans come and intervene hard on the side of the white supremacists, determined to pick a fight with the Eastern ethnic Russians and to completely dominate them and obliterate Russian culture from the society. And so that's the people that America supports, the Ukrainians most determined to pick a fight with the Russian, not even minority, but the Russian half of the country.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but where these battle lines, because it's a battle line, it's not a border line at this point, where they are drawn today seems to me to be much more in alignment with the ethnic makeup and preferences of the people, in that if this were to just be drawn as the new border, that it would actually probably be a recipe for maybe a potential peace, a lasting one, where you have the Russians that are in the east and the hardcore Ukrainian separatists in the left, and then everybody just goes home. Is that at all feasible? Because it does. If you listen to fucking Anthony Blinken, it's not feasible.
Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. It's not with America providing the moral hazard. Right. That you guys, as long as you keep conscripting people, we'll keep arming them so you can keep this fight going. Of course, they'll continue to do that as long as they can. And look, I mean, I couldn't speak for these people. I don't know for sure, but I think that it's very fair to presume that much of the population of Eastern and Southern Ukraine would have preferred to stay in Ukraine, and certainly did not want to be invaded and conquered by Russia militarily, and their land exploded to pieces this way.
Yeah, no doubt.
So it's not the case, just like Hispanics in Texas. It's not the case that, of course, they all want to be ruled by Mexico City. You know what I mean? That's not right. And so same thing here. And I'm sure there are some who were very happy to be protected by Russia because, of course, Kiev was at full-scale war against them. Or not full-scale, but a very brutal war against them.
Bombing campaign.
And certainly they were outside of Kiev's protection in any way. So certainly some of them welcomed the change to Russian sovereignty. While I'm sure there were others who resent the hell out of it.
Well, Putin claims that he's fine with making the East basically its own nation, as long as they have a buffer zone between.
Not anymore. That was at first.
I thought recently he said that was still no.
No, because they officially annexed all 4 provinces and ratified it in the Russian parliament, signed it into law and everything. So at least according to Russian law, all 4 of the eastern or southeastern provinces, Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporozhia, and Kherson, all belong to Russia now. And they held little plebiscites, which are, come on.
Right, yeah, well, I mean, during a time of war, who the fuck knows? But
overall, what you're saying is essentially right. Because look, the ethnic Ukrainian right wing from the west of the country, they don't want these people anyway. And many of them, I have quotes of some of these Nazis saying, let's just kick them out. It'd be better to have a smaller Ukraine. We can't forcibly march them all out. So let's just draw the line in a new place. Screw it. Let them go. Mm-hmm. And yes, I think that they could have peace in an instant. And I think if Joe Biden told them, look, the American people won't let me spend money on this anymore, sorry, then they would go to the table and they'd make a deal. And
do you think Trump will? Because he looks, from my vantage point, whether they replace Biden or they don't, I don't see you slamming in a Gavin Newsom or a Gretchen Whitmer or putting Kamala Harris up there, who, by the way, polls 10 points worse in many states than Biden, the guy whose brain doesn't work. People are still like, fuck this lady. Give us the non-compos menace idiot. We're better off. So my point being, I think particularly after what happened on Saturday to Donald Trump, it's almost certainly going to be him as the next president of the United States. Is he sincere? He says he can bring peace in 24 hours or even before he's inaugurated. Do you think that happens?
Oh, no. By the way, wouldn't it be funny if instead of stepping down from the race, Biden instead just got an idea and overthrew Harris and replaced her on the ticket with a stronger vice president? Look,
He's like,
okay,
this is the weakness, actually. I got rid of the dead weight
yeah,
over here.
it's true. I'm probably only going to do 2 years, but I'll be handing off power to, what's his name, who's so charismatic.
Gavin Newsom.
Oh, God, wouldn't that be hilarious? Or Hillary Clinton.
Be my nightmare, but yeah.
Yeah, but I'm sorry, I went off on the tangent. Your question was whether Trump will make peace. I hope soon. No, not immediately. And look, it's going to be an outrageous scandal when he tells Kiev, well, you boys are going to have to give up 4 provinces, or at least 2/3 of each of them, or what have you.
Isn't that the obvious answer, though? I mean, yeah, like I asked you earlier. I don't know if you actually got to an answer because we went on these long, tirades. But
my bad.
No, it's fine. I love them. But do you think that that's? Do you think that they're going to bring NATO in? Because that's the only way you fucking win this war.
No, dude. No. Listen, this is so clear, and it just goes to show how stupid the whole war is. They're not willing to bring Ukraine into NATO because then we'd have to fight for them, and they're not willing to fight for them. They're not putting the 82nd Airborne in there. They're not pulling our cruisers up in the Black Sea to go to war with Russia and lead to a nuclear war. And they made that very clear from the beginning, and it's true that they've fudged their lines and sent in tanks when they said they wouldn't and things like that. But
they have no intention to win this war, is what you're saying?
No, absolutely not. Okay. Absolutely not. And they have said from the beginning that, they'll fight till Ukraine can't fight no more.
Man,
which, by the way, if you go back 2.5 years, plan A was we're going to back an insurgency there. Everybody thought that the Russians were going to smash the Ukrainian military to bits, and that immediately it was going to be a Nazi-led insurgency in the woods. Mm. And instead, the Russians didn't come that hard, and the Ukrainians fought back like hell in the very first invasion there on 4 major fronts. And the Russians were stymied on 4 major fronts. Mm-hmm. And then instead of going, oh yeah, and sending in everything they had, they decided to wage this sort of slow motion, piecemeal artillery war and slowly grind the Ukrainians up over the long term has been their strategy. I'm sorry, I'm off on the tangent. I'm not answering your question again.
No, it's okay. I mean, so the end game for this is
whether NATO would intervene. No, yeah. The answer is you guys eventually are going to lose. And then the question is whether they could still back an insurgency, Clint. You could have the Ukrainian military essentially ground almost down to nothing. Then the Russians launch a massive offensive and smash what's left of it. And then they go back to plan A. Not to plan B or C, but back to plan A, which is back a Mujahideen Afghanistan-like insurgency led by these neo-Nazi groups against Russia, which they think they can do for the long term. Afghanistan took 10 years.
Wow.
So and that's the way they talk about it openly. Yeah.
So it's going to be Gladio. You leave behind terrorists, essentially.
That's the plan. That was always the plan. Yeah. Now they've done way better than what they had originally planned.
That's not fun. All right, let's see if we can get any good news on Israel-Palestine. Is that full conquest? Because it looks like they're going full conquest.
Well, this comes down to the election too, right? I think Biden has told them that he doesn't want to see an ethnic cleansing campaign. He's willing to tolerate outrageous levels of cruelty, assuming he even knows what's going on there at all. I don't know. But I believe it's credible reporting, right? That those original statements by the Israelis that we're just going to clean the place out and we're going to force everybody into Egypt or somewhere else. We demand the rest of the world take them and all this. They shut up about that. They quit talking like that. And they have been bombing the hell out of these people. But they're apparently not forcibly transferring 2 million of them away across the border or anywhere else. There are people in Netanyahu's coalition who absolutely would be happy to drive them into the Sinai and just watch them all bake in the sun to death.
But you don't think tactically that's what they're trying to do at this point?
I don't think that's what they're doing right now. Okay. I think that there's such a danger that if Trump wins, that they're just gonna feel completely unleashed to do whatever they want.
I mean, the fact that Netanyahu called and congratulated Biden, that apparently rubbed Trump the wrong way.
Not good enough.
It's not. But I'm just saying, my hope is that the divide between Trump and Netanyahu is significant, and it might give him more of a backbone than he would otherwise have. I'm dreaming here. I mean, this is wish casting. But no, I just want to see peace. It's like, it's crazy. Super.
You know what it is though, man, is they need that money. And, Sheldon Adelson is dead now, but his wife, Miriam Adelson, is still around, and she's
top donor, I believe.
Yeah, hundreds of millions of dollars. The Republican Party is completely dependent on her and a few other billionaires who are hardcore Zionists like this. And Donald Trump, he doesn't give a damn. His son-in-law, who's sure to be back in the saddle up there, is Netanyahu's godson.
Wait, Jared Kushner is Netanyahu's godson?
Yes. Netanyahu slept in his bed when he would come to visit New York City.
I did not know that. That's crazy. Man.
So Jared Kushner, you may have seen where he was saying, we're going to knock all this down and build condos here. We're just going to colonize.
I saw that.
Yeah.
He's his godson? That's insane.
That's the mindset. Wow. I have this funny story that this is total BS, but I just think it's funny. It goes to your question of why do they hate Trump so much? What do they have against him anyway? Like, okay, he was supposed to be the jabroni for Hillary, and that didn't work out, and he became the president. But still, like, the guy's the golden arches, right? He's Americana. He's Nike shoes. He's Madonna. What do you got against him anyway? It's not like he's really a Kremlin agent.
No.
And like, okay, so he's like a little soft on Russia, but so is Obama. A little soft on Russia, right? So like, what is exactly so objectionable about the guy? So I just got this completely bullshit story that I made up that I think is funny, where what it really is that the FBI and the NSA and the CIA were secretly tapping Trump's phone, and they heard him take a bribe from Sheldon Adelson and promise to nuke Iran for Israel. But they can't say that, because that would get Israel in trouble, and you can't get Israel in trouble. So instead, they heroically decided to frame him for treason with Russia. They created the entire Russiagate hoax in order to heroically prevent him and stymie him and keep him from getting us into a full-scale war with Iran, which is total bullshit. I just made that up. I'm rationalizing severely here. Like, is there a scenario where there's some kind of reason that you could appreciate why they hate this guy so much? As I said before, Bill Kristol, the leader of the Never Trumpers, is the brother-in-law of Elliot Abrams, who's Donald Trump's guy, who tried to do the coup in Venezuela, helped, negotiate Israel policy, helped advise Kushner on Israel policy.
Yeah.
He's like related to the Podhoritzes or whatever.
Yeah, and then on top of that, he's highly manipulatable. Like, you can just basically flatter this guy. He'll put fucking John Bolton. He'll talk about America first and non-intervention, and then he'll put John Bolton in there just because he wants to still pretend as if he's going to be a tough guy or whatever his rationale is.
Actually, you know what that was? That was Sheldon Adelson made a phone call. That's exactly what it is. John Bolton called, and you can read this at Low Blog. I'm 90% sure that Eli Clifton covered this. That John Bolton called Trump from Sheldon Adelson's office in Las Vegas and said, "Guess where I am? There's somebody here wants to talk to you." Handed the phone to the boss, who said, "I want you to make this guy your national security advisor."
Well, that answers that. All right. So, but my point is, you can buy him.
Crazy.
You bought the influence. You got him into the White House, and then he'll do what you want. So I don't know. The objections to him, the panic about him is so on 11 all the time. It's like I feel like Americans broadly have just had this adrenaline dump where like we can't, like, if we actually had a really dangerous political figure that was arising, I mean, I feel like all of them are dangerous, but you know what I'm saying? Like, if we had a real scary dude rising. Yeah. If we had that on the rise, I don't think people would buy any of the warnings because everyone's just so tapped out. They're like, I don't believe anything.
That's right.
You said the same shit about Mitt Romney. Like, it's all of these guys are the same dude, basically.
Right. And look, Trump has obviously always been within the margins. He's a little bit more of a trade hawk on China than they would prefer. I mean, he's posturing now as like being hardcore pro-labor and wanting to drive up wages for workers and stuff. I highly doubt that. Yeah. This is another major part of the ideology of American empire that they don't like to talk about is mass immigration, which I'm not the world's most right-wing hard ass on immigration, but this is a corporate plot. Bernie Sanders is right about that. Open immigration is a right-wing plot. And I don't mean like nativist right-wing voters and workers. I mean right-wing oligarchs.
Yep.
They, first of all, as we all know, especially your audience knows, they're the first to benefit from inflation because the Cantillon effects, right? And so they're doing just fine. But then the last people to get a cost of living increase are their wage earning employees. And when they get a cost of living increase, what happens, Clint? The Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, or any of his successors, they go on TV and they blame the hourly wage earners finally getting a cost of living increase for causing the inflation. Oh no, prices are going up because there's upward pressure on wages and the poor helpless bosses are having to pay their wage earners more, and that's driving up prices at the counter. You goddamn liars, you money printing motherfuckers, right? And that's what they always do, right? And so when workers are demanding that cost of living increase, what do you do about that? You open the border wide open.
Right.
To you literally downward pressure on wages in sneakers.
Well,
right?
That's an obvious benefit to the business world and the oligarchs, but there's also the UN and the NATO Agenda 2030 stuff where like they genuinely want to have some sort of like reparations program that happens from any imperial power all over the world. If you were an imperial power at any point, if you're the UK, if you're America, well, then you have to accept the huddled masses from the third world because that's your form of reparations. They're poor because of you. Now they come and they live with you. That I'm not exaggerating. That's like literally what they write in the UN. So it's multifaceted, but it's obviously a plot, no matter how you frame it.
Yeah, bomb the world, invite the world is what they say, right?
What a great plan. Anyways, tell me about when the Provoked. Have you changed the title? It is Provoked still?
No, yeah, Provoked. Oh, okay. One more thing. I saw Vance's speech, which was very, pro wages, intervention, weird stuff. But one of the things that he invoked in there, it was one phrase in a whole sentence. It wasn't the point, but it was in there. Iraq War II as a great example of how Joe Biden betrayed this country, supporting that war. They lied us into that horrible war and we got nothing out of it. And it was just a horrible disaster. And the whole crowd is with him on that.
For my younger audience, he's referencing 2003 invasion of Iraq.
Yeah.
They may be too young to know that we also invaded in the 90s.
Yeah. And then again in the Obama years after they created the caliphate for these guys, they had to go blow it up again. Iraq War III. We're still fighting Iraq War 3.5 right now. The long-term help for the Shiite government, suppression of the Sunni insurgency there. But anyway, that's major progress on the right that we're finally making there, where people are willing, maybe not to admit to themselves how bad they were on it then, but at least admit now how wrong that was to do and how bad for this country it was to get involved and get engaged in intervening in starting a war. You don't start a war, and so finally this is getting through to people on the right.
This is why a second Trump term to me has a chance of being a positive for the anti-war movement, just not so much because of Trump, but because it would be very popular for him to be good on these issues, to actually negotiate peace, to force his piece of shit State Department to actually go to the negotiating table or say, hey, Ukraine, we're not going to continue to send you funding unless you go and you negotiate. Hey, Israel, same deal. Like you could actually have a really good movement because his supporters want that. The problem is that there's such a cult of personality with this guy that he can just not do that and they'll all still love him. So
great point. Yep, it's totally right. But I agree with you that it would be great politics. And this is absolutely what he should have done when he was sworn in 21. is he should have said, oh, I'm guilty of treason with Russia, huh? And he should have invited Putin to Washington, D.C., taken him out to the ball game, taken him to dinner, and then sat down and signed a new nuclear weapons treaty. We're going to save START 2 or New START, and we're going to, enhance, erase all the sunsets and add to it, and et cetera. We're going to cut our palms and shake on protecting the INF treaty and all of our nuclear treaties, get back in the anti-ballistic missile treaty that George W. Bush tore up. And then he could have pulled all of our troops out of Yemen, and the ended the air campaign in Yemen, pulled all of our troops out of Afghanistan, and just completely culture jammed the Democrats, and could have just won over millions of liberals and leftists that like, man, I'm supposed to hate this guy, but he just ended the war in Yemen, pulled our troops out of Iraq and Syria and Afghanistan, and whatever, dude, you guys can demonize him all you want. He just signed a new nuclear weapons treaty, bringing us down to 1,000 deployed nukes each. Dope. And I don't care what you say, right? Like they wouldn't have been able to stop him. See, he's such a dilettante, man. It sucks because if he was just 5 or 10 points smarter, we can all see there's so much potential there for a rogue president to do the right thing. But he always kinds of blows it. So like he made his main priority, his first priority was a tax cut instead of even building the wall or whatever. And then tariffs. He wants to add tariffs. So he's got to get that through the Congress. But the other major plank besides immigration and tariffs was ending the wars. And you can end the wars just by being the president. You don't have to ask nobody nothing. Hell, if Barack Obama can start a war with the snap of his fingers in Libya, then Donald Trump sure as hell could have said every morning at 9 a.m., are my troops out of Syria yet? You heard me. Those are your orders. You're about to get prosecuted if you don't implement them, Mr. Secretary. I said I want my soldiers out now. And he could have done that and absolutely stood by. And if he had been consistent and forced his way, he could have had our troops out of the Middle East completely by the end of March, by the end of April of 21. And then all the Democrats' Russiagate crap would have just fallen apart. Because you'd have had like a solid third of the left, or a solid third of like Democrat leaning voters would have said, I like this guy, man. You know what I mean? I don't know. Again, he's the Golden Arches. It's not like he's some stranger and he actually might be a Russian spy. He's not. He's Donald freaking J. Trump. Well, the guy's as famous as a Ford pickup truck. Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah, not just left, anti-war left, but a lot of libertarians are going to vote for him anyways. But he would have got the real hardcore anti-war people like me on board, despite the fact that he spent more in 4 years than any president in human history. I probably still would have voted for the guy because Joe Biden's doing similarly, and he's also, fomenting World War III. So it's like, all right, well, obviously I'm going to go with the guy who ended all the wars. That'd be amazing. Plus, financially, it could be good for us long term if we actually finally end the empire. My hope is that he has surrounded himself with some people that seem to actually be giving lip service to our ideas in a way that seems more sincere and principled and grounded than Donald Trump does. Vivek comes to mind, but at the same time, they're all politicians. I don't have a clue. Anyways, when does Provoke come out, Scott? Can we break a date?
Yeah. No, I don't have a date. I will say this, though, about Iran. See, we're real lucky that the Ayatollah doesn't want to fight us. So, honestly, Donald Trump could say to Israel, or he could say to the Ayatollah, listen, I'm pulling out of the Middle East. Don't you ever attack Israel, or I will fuck you up. Right. But anyway, I'm going home other than that. And the Ayatollah doesn't want to fight Israel or America anyway. And so you really could wrap that up if he was willing to play the card that way. I mean, Iran is the only supposed threat, and they're not a threat. Simple as that. Now, as far as Provoked, that's my Great Russia book. It's I got it up to 1,400 pages. Now it's back down to 1,100. And I want
people to know when I read it a year and a half ago, give or take, it was 650 pages. So it doubled, and now you're cutting it down. Amazing.
Now I'm cutting it back down, and it's still twice as long as it was then. I'm sorry, guys. I kind of wrote about a lot of stuff. I mean, the good news is that the people who've seen it before seem to really like it, right, Clint? And
yes, it's
think that there's lots of learnings in there and stuff. So I really hope that people like it when it finally is done.
This summer,
I have kind of a soft target at the end of the year.
Okay.
I'm not going to promise it'll be in your stocking for Christmas or whatever, because I really don't think I can make that deadline. But I am steadily working on it every single day, including weekends, 7 days a week. I do nothing but work on this book. And
as far as I'm concerned, it's your
turning
magnum
down
opus.
all travel.
It's your magnum opus, and I cannot wait for the world to read it. It's I think it's going to stun people with the level of propaganda and lies and deceit they've had to deal with when it comes to this war. I just hope you get it out soon, primarily because I want people to read it so that there actually becomes some sort of additional public opinion. It can't just be me and Dave going around to fucking podcasts telling this story. Like I want them to read it directly from the source, man.
I know. I feel the same way. And I quite sincerely apologize to people. I mean, the thing was supposed to be done by the end of 22 somehow or something. And here we are halfway through 24. And
that's when I read it. I read it early 23. It's such a good book, man.
Yeah. I mean, it is a hell of a thing, but I when I go back over it, I like it. I believe sort of like with Enough Already, I'm trying very hard to tell you what you need to know, but then to let you off the hook as fast as I can and move on. Right. And not, drive you to boredom and despair over, too many damn details. Right. But I do prove my point very well.
You sure do.
I have more than 5,500 footnotes right now. We did a thing. I had my buddy figure out a script to take all the URLs out of the footnotes. Which, a lot of them are book footnotes that don't have URLs, but there are a lot of them with URLs. So we took just the URLs out, and that was 90 pages. Okay. Wow. So if all the notes, if we move all the notes to the back, it's more than 400 pages of just
Holy
notes.
Shit. That's so crazy.
So,
all right. What about Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com? Are you guys doing anything?
Yeah. Well, the Institute right now, we're running a major fund drive. Thank you for asking. We do this only twice a year. And, Clint, I guess the history of this thing. Like I originally created it for me and Sheldon Richmond and Will Grigg to be able to raise a little money and not seem like we're just bums begging. Like, hey, look, we got a little website and it's just a little thing. But now I got like 20 guys.
Right.
And we published 14 books. And I got like all-time libertarian greats like Sheldon Richmond, Ted Carpenter, James Bovard, and Laurie Calhoun leading the masthead there. But then I got the whole new generation as well. I got Kyle Anzalone and Keith Knight, Connor Freeman, Hunter DeRensis, Patrick McFarlane, and then we've just added Danny Sanchez, Jeremy R. Hammond, and Thomas Edlum, and Bill Bupert, who's this great anti-war historian and counterinsurgency expert. And Hammond, as you know, is the libertarian movement's foremost expert on Israel-Palestine, blows me out of the water by far. And just on and on. We just got five or six really great podcasts, tons of great writers. We're constantly publishing books. I think Keith Knight has already published 2 and is working on 2 more right now.
Jeez.
I'm working on mine. I got
just go to the Libertarian Institute to donate, or where do they go?
Yeah, that's right. It's libertarianinstitute.org/donate. And, we give premiums, free gifts as a token of our appreciation for people's support. So you can choose from all the different books we put out. Our very latest one is about how Israel helped lie us into war to get Iraqi oil back 20 years ago, by Gary Vogler. And we've got cool little USB thumb drives that look like the book of Fool's Errand and Enough Already. And it's got the audio book on there, and all kinds of cool stuff. And people should know, and this is totally true, that I just take this money and pay my guys with it. We don't have an office building in DC. I do not have a brand new truck that I'm making payments on. That's here. Right. My truck is literally 29 years old, and
I can vouch. Scott Horton does not drive a Ferrari. I've been in his boat. It's modest, so you guys can donate safely.
That's right. The boat was $1,000 on Craigslist. And yes, so I don't squander your money. The money goes to paying my guys and book production and that's it. Like, you can feel good about, like, literally, seriously knowing very well. And Tom Woods is on my board of directors, looking over my shoulder too. I husband your resources as carefully as I possibly can, just to pay my writers. That's all it is. And honestly, like, just for the future of the movement, you believe in libertarianism, you want somebody, you know, posting the flag and standing by it for libertarianism, then that's the Libertarian Institute. And I'm really proud of the great team that we've got, all the great work that they're doing. And so I'm not ashamed at all now. Before I was like a little embarrassed, like I'm raising money for me and Will, but like, nah, man, these guys deserve to be paid for all the great work that they're doing. And I don't pay them, any of them, nearly enough for the work that they do. And so anything that people can do to help pay the bills at the Institute and help me keep these guys working is greatly appreciated.
Well, I would add that you also are not paid what you're worth. But anyways, libertarianinstitute.org. If you want to donate and support their work, I could not recommend them highly enough. All of those guys you named off are great, and probably my favorite of the bunch I just got to talk to for the past 2 hours. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Liberty Lockdown is out of here in, I don't know how many seconds. Let's find it. In 8 seconds. Bye.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold. Where did it come from and where did it go?
Ooh, that was loud.